The War That Saved My Life, Chapter 24. Butter galloped. He trotted first, and that was so bouncy I had to hold on to his mane so I didn't fall off. But I kept kicking him, and he trotted faster and faster until suddenly everything evened out, and he was cantering. If I kept kicking him from there, he went faster still, until my eyes watered and the wind made noise in my ears. That was galloping. It was the best. I tried to jump the stone wall of Butter's pasture. I galloped him the length of the field, hard as I could, and steered him right toward the wall. He got close, then slammed his feet into the ground. He stopped dead. I kept going straight over his ears. I missed hitting the base of the wall, but not by much. Susan came running into the field. I hadn't known she was watching me. "Stop that, you idiot," she said. I looked at her. Butter was snorting and tossing his head, and I figured I'd better have another go at the wall quickly before I lost my nerve. "You don't have the first clue what you're doing," Susan continued. "You get on over to Fred Grimes and get him to teach you something before you get yourself killed. Putting that poor pony at a 3-foot wall when he's hardly ever jumped in his life." "He hasn't?" I asked. I figured all horses knew how to jump walls. Jonathan's horse hadn't had any trouble with it. "He hasn't," she said. She rubbed at the end of Butter's nose. "You'll hurt him if you aren't careful. You'll scare him, and that'll put him off jumping forever, not to mention what it might do to you." She should talk about hurting the pony, ignoring him until he was practically crippled. He'd been better as soon as his hooves were trimmed, better the very next day. "Yes, I know what you're thinking," she continued, "but I know what he needs now, and I won't hurt him again. You know what you need now, too, because I'm telling you. You get on over to Fred Grimes." So I went over to see Fred in the stables behind Maggie's house. He agreed to watch me ride and help me for a bit of time after his lunch 2 days a week. In exchange, I'd work for him the rest of the afternoon. Susan gave me a map she'd drawn and showed me how to trace my route on it so I wouldn't be lost again. I tied my crutches to the back of the saddle so I had them for doing chores. Fred taught me to kick less. He taught me to use one leg only for a canter so that I didn't have to get bounced by the trot. He tried to teach me to post to the trot, to rise and fall to the motion smoothly without bouncing. But that was hard with only one stirrup. He taught me more about steering, and when he was happy with my progress, he set up little poles in the fields beyond the stable yard and had me practice going over them. It was a long way from jumping a stone wall. Fred said I wasn't to try that on Butter until he told me I was ready. Stephen White's colonel sent another invitation to tea. I declined. "Idiot girl," Susan grumbled. Meanwhile, the war had become an endless stream of pamphlets that the government sent through the mail. How to wear your gas mask, why to wear your gas mask, how not to get hit by a car in the blackout. You could carry a flashlight if you covered over the glass with a tissue paper. You should paint curbs white so the people driving the cars could see them. Why you should give the government your excess pots and pans. They wanted to make planes from them. Susan refused to do it. She said she had exactly as many pans as she needed. This made Jamie so upset that eventually she relented and gave him an old nasty chip pan to turn in. There weren't any bombs. What there was German submarines circling all of England, trying to blow up any ships heading in or out of her harbors. This was a big problem, Susan said, because England didn't grow enough food. Most of the food English people ate was shipped in from other countries. Already there was less food in the shops, and what was there cost more. Though Susan said some of that was because summer was over. We wouldn't see as many fresh fruits and vegetables until next spring. You never saw anyone more interested in fruits and vegetables than Susan. We were all the time having to eat strange things. Brussels sprouts, turnips, leeks, peaches, which I loved, but also prunes, which I didn't. Prunes came in cans and were slimy going down. Every week that went by without bombs, more evacuees returned to London. Even the ones living with Lady Thornton had gone. In the village, Lady Thornton fussed about it, but she couldn't stop parents from sending for their children. London will be bombed, she insisted. Ma'am never wrote, so Susan was still stuck with us. When I said so, she gave me an odd look. Your mother's smart to keep you here where it's safer, she said. But I wish she'd answer my letters. I find her silence hard to understand. By the start of November, so many children had returned to London that Jamie's teacher left too. His class was combined with the other primary class. His new teacher didn't think he had the devil in him. She said so. She didn't care at all if he wrote with his left hand. He still wet the bed. I thought it was mostly habit by now. Susan had a rubber sheet to protect the mattress, but she was tired of cleaning the regular sheets. I was tired of waking up to the dampness and smell. Neither of us said so to Jamie. He was ashamed, I knew. Lady Thornton wanted Susan to join the Women's Volunteer Service, the WVS. She came to tea and told Susan she needed her help. No one needs my help, Susan said. Besides, I'm busy taking care of these children. Lady Thornton cut her eyes at me. Jamie was at school, but I'd come in from the pasture to have tea. It wasn't one of my days for helping Fred. This doesn't seem to need much care, Lady Thornton said. You'd be surprised, Susan said. I felt cross. I didn't need her. Plus, she still spent part of each day lying around staring at nothing. I said, it's not like you have a proper job. Susan glared at me. Lady Thornton laughed out loud. Then Lady Thornton said, gesturing to the sewing machine still set up in the corner of the room, we could use you to sew bed jackets for soldiers. All sorts of sewing, actually. Susan shook her head. You all don't like me, she said. The women in this village never liked me. Lady Thornton pressed her lips together. She set her teacup down. That's not true, she said. Susan looked cross. Don't be patronizing, she said. Becky got along with your set because of the horses, but that's all. You never gave anyone a chance, Lady Thornton said. Most of the village came to the funeral. Oh, the funeral! Bunch of nosy busybodies. I think you should make an effort, Lady Thornton said. You might be surprised. And it's good to be seen helping the war effort, don't you agree? This isn't the time to be isolationist. I had been listening closely. I asked, what's that mean? Lady Thornton said, an isolationist is someone who doesn't support the war, someone who wants us to stand apart, someone who doesn't care about things. I said, but she doesn't care about things. Susan looked like I'd slapped her. How can you say that? Of course I do. I shrugged. Is feeding you 3 meals a day not caring for you? She demanded. No, don't you look away. You look at me, Ada. When I confronted Jamie's teacher, wasn't that caring for him? Who knew she'd get so wound up? I tried to look away, but she put her hand under my chin and turned my face back toward her. Wasn't it? She insisted. I didn't want to answer, but I knew she wouldn't let go of me until I did. Maybe, I said at last. She released me and turned back to Lady Thornton, who was looking amused. I'll join, she said. As soon as Lady Thornton left, Susan told me off. What did you mean by complaining that I haven't got a proper job? What sort of job do you expect me to have? I shrugged. It surprised me how she could go on buying food without working, even though she did get paid for taking us. Ma'am works in the pub, I said. Well, I'm not doing that, she said. I did try to get a job when I first moved here with Becky. No one would have me, Oxford degree or not. Any position I was qualified for was reserved for men. Can't have a woman stealing a man's job now, can we? I didn't understand why we were having this conversation. Oh, she continued, me in the WVS? All those wretched do-gooders? What nonsense. Why do soldiers need bed jackets, I asked. I wasn't sure what a bed jacket was. Who knows, Susan said. They're for hurt soldiers, I'd say, ones that have to go to the hospital. I hadn't heard of any hurt soldiers. The ones that get blown up in the ocean, fall into the water and die, I said. I suppose so, Susan said, shuddering, but there are different kind of battles. Some hurt soldiers survive. A few days later, Susan got her WVS uniform. She put it on to go to her first meeting. She looked nice in it. She wore stockings and leather shoes with heels. Quit staring, she said as she pulled on her gloves. You could come with me, a junior member, or perhaps a token evacuee. I shook my head. While she was gone, I thought I might try out the sewing machine, or cook something. The weather was wretched. I didn't want to ride. Why are you scared? I asked her. She made a face. All those proper housewives. I don't fit in. I never have. You've got the uniform, I said. She made another face. True, but it's not the outside that counts. Not with that group. Oh well. She went away to her meeting. I stayed home and broke her sewing machine.